Good evening, dear friends and book lovers. I am Prasun Chatterjee, and it is with great pleasure that we from Pan Macmillan India welcome you to the launch of Kishalay Bhattacharya's An Unfinished Revolution, a Hostage Crisis, Adivasi Resistance, and the Nakshal Movement. It has been wonderful to associate with OP Jindal Global University for the launch of this book, the institution where Kishalay has been recently teaching in the School of Journalism and Communications. Kishalay Bhattacharya is a senior journalist who has reported from India's conflict zones for over two decades. He has received the Ramnath Goenka Excellence in Journalism Award 2006-7 for his reportage of internally displaced people. His coverage of the abduction and rescue of two Italian tourists, the theme of this book, was nominated for the Best Current Affairs program by Association of Internal Broadcasting Awards in 2013. With interesting turns in the narrative, Kishalay's book tells us about the experiences of two Italian nationals taken hostage by the Maoists in the Kandhamal region of Orissa. Uh, while the book looks into the past of tribal resistance and its appropriation by the Maoists to make sense of these events of March 2012, it brings to us the gripping tale which assumed global proportions. With the tribal dominated backdrop, the Indian state, and the global linkages of the kidnapping, the book traverses many layers of political and global communities to bring us an intense story which I am sure you will love to read. Kishalay's book provides us with the opportunity to welcome our readers, to enjoy their reading, and ask pertinent questions about key political and social events of our times. Today, we have an eminent group of panelists for the discussion on 50 years of Naksalbari and the Adivasi question. Among the panelists, along with Kishalay Bhattacharya, we have Professor Nandini Sundar, renowned sociologist and professor at Delhi School of Economics. She is the author of widely discussed works on the political identity of the marginalized and the Adivasis in South Asia. Her latest work is The Burning Forest, India's War in Bastar. Dr. Ajay Sahni is an author and expert on counterterrorism. He is executive director of the Institute for Conflict Management, New Delhi, and edits South Asia Intelligence Review and Fault Lines. Mr. Hartosh Singh Bal is currently political editor of The Caravan. He will be moderating the discussion today. He has authored the book Waters Close to Us and co-authored the novel A Certain Ambiguity, which won the 2007 Association of American Publishers Award for the best professional or scholarly work in mathematics. Now, please allow me to invite the founding Vice Chancellor of OP Jindal University, Professor C. Rajkumar, to unveil the book and speak a few words on it. Professor Rajkumar, please.
Good evening to all of you. First of all, I would like to congratulate my colleague, Professor Kishalay Bhattacharya, for really writing this extraordinary book. I would have, in the normal course, said that I'm yet to read the book, but because my flight got slightly delayed this afternoon, I had the privilege to read a good part of the book. And it's a fascinating reading. So let me, before I make some remarks about the book itself, I want to just say that congratulations, Kishalay, for this outstanding work. I also want to thank the publishers, Pan Macmillan India, for publishing this work. In fact, the work is a unique form of work in which combines many aspects of what we would call personal narratives at some level, but also it raises some very important questions drawing upon sociology, anthropology, issues relating to internal security, and also the Adivasi question itself. In that sense, this book is unique. Before I really talk about the book, I want to once again congratulate my colleague, but also the Jindal School of Journalism and Communication for hosting this evening's book launch. For us at OP Jindal Global University, nothing gives us greater pleasure than colleagues' academic work, research work. In many ways, it's a fitting testimonial for many years of serious reflection, writing, that has culminated in the publication of this work. I also want to take a moment to thank all of you for accepting our invitation to be part of this occasion to celebrate the launch of this book itself. I can easily say for a moment that I would like to thank NDTV for a large number of NDTV colleagues to be present here, both current and former. I also want to take a moment to thank our students who have spent nearly 3.5 hours braving the traffic from Sonipat to come to Delhi to be part of this launch. I'm grateful to them for being present here. I know that they will be inspired by the forthcoming panel discussion that we have. For those of you who may not have read the book, let me just first say that there could be easily 3 books out there. And I will say with to Kishalay that only a journalist who has this extraordinary ability to develop narratives which are in many ways complex, but also has multiple actors and takes place at different levels, both in terms of time and space, to articulate it the way he has done. So congratulations, Kishalay, but I do think that there could have been 3 books out there. He, in the initial stage itself, Kishalay outlines the framework on the basis of which he has written the book, and I will, for those of you who may not have read the book, I will say, and I'm quoting Kishalay in the author's note, and he's saying that in that sense, the book is part reportage, part personalized ethnography, and part memoirs. I didn't choose Kandhamal, it happened to me. I chose Korapur and Malikaganji because of their strategic importance, given how they blurred the Odisha, Jharkhand, Andhra, and Chhattisgarh borders, and this is where the Maoists find their roots. I wanted to see those places as an integral part of larger political and historical institutions, but from the ground up close and intimate. And then he further says, every story or history has multiple realities, what really happened and the various perceptions of what happened. It has facts and figures, sometimes incorrect, and then images and words wherein the facts and figures find their place. Unfortunately, much of what is known today is through mass media that records real-time stories and shapes perceptions. I want to briefly raise this issue because the book, in many ways, while it has a real-life incident which Kishalay was part of as a journalist, but then instead of only talking about that particular issue and the complexity surrounding that very issue, including the geopolitical dimension surrounding it, the national security dimension surrounding it, and the very complex nature of different stakeholders involved in a labyrinth set of negotiations to ultimately find the release of these individuals who were kept in captivity, Kishalay didn't stop there. Kishalay raises some of the more fundamental questions relating to issues surrounding development and the future of the Adivasi struggles, and also the role of Maoist movement itself. As you read many parts of the book, there will be moments when one would easily sympathize with the cause of different individuals, including the Maoist movements, but also you will develop a better sense of the complexity surrounding these struggles. The heart of the book also recognizes the neglected cause of the Adivasis in general, and how some of those struggles have been appropriated by the Maoist movements itself. Of course, the book is quite rightly critical at various parts of the book about the what I would call the democratic betrayal on the part of the state and its instrumentalities at multiple levels. That's a telling narrative that takes place in many parts of the book, and I think it is fair to say that one of the big struggles that we are continuing to have in the context of addressing these issues is that how do we create faith and hope in the people of India, among the people of India who are struggling to make a part of, make themselves relevant in the developmental paradigm that we are trying to achieve. In that sense, the book at multiple levels recognizes what both sociologists and anthropologists have talked about, the root causes of conflict and violence, and how unless and until the state takes efforts to address these root causes, it will not be possible to eliminate, let alone reduce, let alone eliminate many of these struggles. There are interesting portions of the book which I really liked. Of course, I would not read it, but I would strongly encourage you to read a beautiful postscript by Ambassador Satyapal about his own reflections about the role of the Indian state, and very interesting references about Planning Commission and other institutions at various points of time, talking about the outcome of some of these state interventions and the role the state and its instrumentalities had played, not effectively so, and in that process created a fertile ground for many of these movements to thrive over a long period of time. Kishalay itself has, there are absolutely important moments in the book when he talks about the complexity of the challenge that we are facing, and I'll read a bit about it. Whether through force, and I quote here, whether through force or indifference, the nature of state response is bound up with the whole politics of dispossession, of throwing people out of their own land. Why the word resource is important is because it is at the heart of the Maoist movement as well as of Adivasi resistance. The first response of the Indian state to any battle over resource has been to use force and criminalize the people demanding what has been granted to them by the constitution. And he makes a reference to Professor Ramachandra Guha's pointed reference to this particular aspect, and I quote Ram a bit. Dalits, women and Muslims continued to be discriminated against, yet these problems were taken up by influential parties and politicians. On the other hand, Adivasis, always neglected, became victims of a development process that rested on the exploitation of their lands, their forests, and their waters. And he goes on. So in a way, the book makes us think, and it doesn't answer some of these questions, but the nature of these questions only reflects the complexity of the issues that we are dealing with. I also felt that the way he related the dynamic process of news that has evolved, and also critically talked about the evolution of the role of media itself. Many of us have always believed that at least a lot of contemporary media doesn't stick with stories to look at the deeper sense of how these stories and issues have evolved. The Kishalay has gone beyond the call of duty of a journalist to address some of the more substantive challenges. So in a way, this book is a reflection of the last over 2 decades of Kishalay's own contribution in the field of journalism. He has been an author, a very distinguished writer, prolific thinker, and also a celebrated journalist, traversed across both print and broadcast journalism. His work has, the nature of his work is such that it has the impact in the long run, and he has absorbed very closely working in conflict zones to understand these issues, and have given himself more time to reflect about these issues. While I was reading the book, I had this, just a week ago, I watched this absolutely fantastic movie, Newton. If you've not done it already, you should. And there's a very interesting parallel to what was in some ways reflected in the movie. Part of it is also in the book too, how these issues are taking place in the real world out there, and how much of what the media covers, or even the larger part of governmental apparatus attempts to address, doesn't meet the eye. So with those words, I would like to once again thank and congratulate Kishalay Bhattacharjee for this outstanding work. I want to in particular recognize the fact that we at OP Jindal Global University are really delighted that one of our colleagues in the Jindal School of Journalism and Communication, which is only literally 60 days old, has got our first publication out of that school, and I look forward to many more works like this, and both from Kishalay and other colleagues. Thank you very much.
Already have had an introduction. We know a little bit about the book. So I'll just, well, first congratulations, Kishalay. And this was the first, I've never seen a Delhi audience queue up for entering a book launch. So it's good to have that kind of audience. Our format is going to be very simple. I think Kishalay will kick off by just telling us how this book came to be. From there on, we'll take questions, just go around. And maybe 45 minutes later, just open the floor for 15 minutes of questions. So that should be about an hour. Is that time? Yeah, so let's just begin at the beginning, Kishalay. How did this book come about? I'm not giving an introduction. I think you can tell us the circumstances in which the book was written and what you sought to achieve with this book.
Thanks, Atosh. Thanks, everyone. Very good evening. You know, actually in 2011, I was working at the Institute for Defense Studies Analysis. I'd taken a sabbatical from NDTV. And I was researching on what the government of India, the Prime Minister, year after year continued to call the gravest internal security threat, which was the Maoist threat. And I did a field work in the areas of Malkangiri and Koraput, and to try and understand the dynamics between the Adivasis and the Maoists, because that seems to be the most stereotypical understanding of Maoism. And then I returned back, and but the paper that I wrote, where I tried again to argue that why India, having fought or having countered, managed insurgency for the last 60 years, more than 60 years, doesn't have a counter-insurgency policy. I mean, India still doesn't have a counter-insurgency policy. So while you say that it's the gravest internal security threat, but you actually do not have a policy to address the insurgency or the internal security threat. And then in 2012, when I returned back to NDTV, there was this news about the Italian tourists, which was the first international abduction by the Maoists in Odisha, in Kandhamal, in a place called Daringbari. Never heard of Daringbari. Daringbari is a very interesting place because even given the terrain of Odisha, that is the place where actually it snows during winter. That was the only introduction that I had of Daringbari. Went out there, extremely difficult to navigate a place like that, and accidentally, I say accidentally because there were several other journalists there, several other television networks and crews, and instead of me, it could have been anyone else actually who would have got access, but we got access thanks to my colleague Sampath Mahapatra, who has been reporting from Odisha for a very long time. So, you know, a couple of us, we gained access, and we went into the camp, which was an impossible trek of 16 hours, which usually the Maoist treks are. We almost killed ourselves, and it was extremely dramatic in retrospect, not dramatic while you are trekking out there, because you're risking your life almost every moment. And we were almost, we also like, in a sense, taken hostage, because once we entered there, or once we gave ourselves over to the Maoists to take us into the camp, we were completely at their mercy. And for 2 days that I stayed with them, I had very intense conversations with Sabyasachi Panda, the commander out there, because there was nothing else to do. And we argued and we debated on various things, and I didn't think about a book really. And suddenly, out of those debates and arguments, Sabyasachi agreed to let go one of the hostages. So we were in that huge dilemma now whether to bring him back, because we did not go in really as interlocutors or negotiators. And what do you do with a hostage, an international hostage? If something happens to him on the way back, then his responsibility is on me. If I don't bring him along with me and something happens to him, then that would be on my conscience. So I took a call and I said, okay, we will take back Claudio with us. And Claudio Colangelo is his name. And there was another problem, another dilemma. He said that I'll let Claudio go, but I will keep Paulo with me. So there was, we were just being able to negotiate the release of one of the hostages. Was that good enough? Was that bad? I didn't know. We just took a call at the spur of the moment, and we decided to bring him back. The rest of my crew were unwell. They were not in a position to move, so that was another logistical nightmare of how to move them out of that situation. Anyway, all this is part of the book, and it makes for good storytelling when you think about it in retrospect. And then when I came back, again, it was not part of a book. We made a small little film, we reported about it, and I was very happy that we got a story. All that happened. A year later, my first publisher, Pan Macmillan India, with whom I published my first book, the CEO, Rajdeep, he is here. He met me, and over a cup of tea, I was telling him the story, and he said that, well, we must have this book. And that's how the book was born. And while writing the book, I figured that this was also the 50 years of the Naxalbari uprising, and something with which we grew up, at least I grew up. It happened in the part of the country that I grew up, and apart from that, being from Bengal, a lot of Bengali literature that we were steeped into talked about Naxalbari all the time, and there was a searing narrative by Shamaresh Mojumdar in Uttaradhikar, Kalbala and Kalpurush of Animesh, who leaves small town Jalpaiguri, comes to Calcutta, gets sucked into the revolution, and is taken into the jail. He comes out paraplegic, and that story with which we grew up left an indelible impression on a young mind for the need of a revolution, which of course we know that did not really happen. And that's how I thought that it's nice to really step back and look at the 50 years of the Naxalbari, of how they sustained the movement through splits and mergers. Really, it's not a movement, but it still sustains in some form or the other. And I tried to peg this, the story of the hostage and the abduction and the release of Claudio, and thereafter in that larger context.
So Nandini, I think we've all managed to read Kishalay's book, and it's a fascinating read built around the narrative of the incident that he describes. But the terrain in which he worked in Bastar and the terrain that he describes, Kandhamala, are very different terrains. In some ways, the tribes are different, the organization of the Maoists are different. So in what way can we actually speak of these as similar phenomenons or just one phenomenon when we talk Naxalbari, Adivasis and the Naxals?
One of the reasons I really enjoyed reading this book, which I liked it for its narrative and many other things, but was the fact that it dealt with Odisha when there is actually very little work on Maoism in Odisha, and it's been something that you bring out very nicely in little snippets, and there's a lot more that we want to know after reading this. I think, I've traveled a bit in both in Malkangiri and Koraput, looking at the problems of the sea mass and also of the cutoff area. And at one level, it's, as Kishalay says, it's quite different in the sense that some of the things that he mentioned, like the Christian cadre that accompanied Sabyasachi Panda, now that was something that really I found very, very interesting. And you talk a bit about the relationship between Christianity and Maoism in that area, and that's something that is quite different from the Bastar situation. The other thing that is quite different, which is a number of kind of civil society groups that are active in Odisha fighting for land rights and so on, which you don't talk about so much here, but in a sense they're the backdrop for what else happens with Maoism. Both whether it's Niyamgiri or it's CMAS in the Chasi Mulya Adivasi Sangh, which actually is not a Maoist organization, it's a Adivasi land rights organization, and then all of them were arrested. And so I think there are lots of things that are common, like the complete deprivation of the area, the way the government treats people. And then there are lots of things that are interesting, which are about local organization and social life.
Ajay, in that context, when the story always begins with Naxalbari. But this interaction between the states and Adivasis and resistance, and whatever the state's role is, does it have a longer history? Is it something that...
Well, I think